On March 1st, in the battle for the village of Poplavy, I was wounded in my left arm. The wound, however, was not serious, but the commander of the medical company, Lieutenant Ivan Nestorenko, insisted that I be evacuated. I was lying in the Army Field Hospital, which was not far from the front line. Together with me was severely wounded 18-year-old Komsomol member Volodya Valeniuk, a sniper of the company. Only in 1985, at the Victory Parade, we met in Moscow. Volodya was a second group invalid. He fought for a year, managed to destroy 18 fascists. The Third Shock Army approached the Velikaya River, but the spring thaw began, and the troops went on the defense. At the end of April, my arm healed, and I was discharged from the hospital. Without difficulty, I found the headquarters of the 150th, located in a dense coniferous forest. The division was in the second echelon of the army. It received a large replenishment and was staffed. But I did not get into the 756th Regiment. I proved that I had every right to return to my unit, but the Chief of Staff of the division was adamant. I was sent to the 469th Rifle Regiment as Deputy Commander of the 2nd Rifle Battalion to the famous Major Ivan Vasilievich Koltunov. Combat met me without much enthusiasm, examined me from head to toe, and said something inaudible, like MDAAA. The end of April and the beginning of May passed in work built the second echelon of defence. Tens of thousands of cubic metres of earth were thrown over. We dug up to 80 kilometres of trenches and passages. They built bunkers and dugouts. Fighters became real builders and officers foremen. Company commanders until late at night made calculations for the required amount of construction materials, tools, made drawings of dugouts and bunkers, and in the morning before the start of work, gathered at the commander's office. Ivan Vasilievich silently, carefully, as the head of the construction trust, considered the drawings, schemes, and applications. Some approved immediately and handed to the company with the words, "Good, go to work." On others, he made corrections, poked a pencil into the paper and said to the company, "Well, what is it you have? What does it look like? Go redo it and show me in 30 minutes." Major Koltunov had exceptional endurance and patience. He did not shout at his subordinates, did not bang his fist on the table, and calmly, in a businesslike manner, he made the commanders of all degrees, as he himself put it, move their brains. In the first days of my stay in the battalion, we looked at each other and somehow imperceptibly became friends. In free moments, the commander often said, "Here is the end of the war. I will go somewhere in the forest and do bees. It's quiet there, and what air." Running ahead, I will say that after the war, the commander served in the army for a long time. In 1950, with the rank of colonel, went into the reserve and, indeed, engaged in beekeeping. He graduated from the Agricultural Institute, entered graduate school, became a candidate of sciences. How much willpower this man had, how much hard work. He could not sit idle, always planned something, went, checked, demanded and taught. In the evening of May 12th, the entire battalion command was summoned to the regimental headquarters. Colonel Nikolai Nikolaevich Bolshy was preoccupied. He greeted by hand with Koltunov, with the Chief of Staff Captain Ivan Vasilievich Kuznetsov, Deputy Battalion Commander for Political Part Captain Nikolai Zinchenko. Then he came up to me, squeezed my hand, and somehow shook it down with a tug. I almost sat down from the intolerable pain, but I held on. The colonel looked first at me, then turned to Major Koltunov. "Well, how is your deputy, not liquid?" This question made me sweat on my forehead. I wanted to answer that liquidity is checked in battle, not in this way, but I kept silent. Soon to the regimental headquarters came Gazik. Out of the car came out the head of the political department of the division, Colonel Nikolai Efimovich Voronin, whom we often saw both on the front line and in the camp among the soldiers. He enjoyed great authority and respect. He came up to me with a smile, asked me if the last wound was bothering me, how I was getting accustomed to my new position. Unpleasant question of the regiment commander disappeared by itself, and I felt that I was in my family. With Voronin came an unfamiliar colonel, and he spoke first. So this battalion, Voronin, you will have this battalion to conduct a demonstration exercise? Yes, Comrade Division Commander. So that's how he is, our new commander of the 150th Division. I'm starting to compare him with Yakovlev. The first impression of Shatilov Vasily Mitrofanovich formed an unimportant spoke in a deaf voice, somehow in the nose, and most importantly, what immediately caught my eye, he was more talking than listening. As you can see, self-confident Zinchenko whispered to me, or overly savvy, or bad before the battalion command of the division, and the regiment set a difficult and responsible task tonight to move into the forest, which is 1 kilometre east of the height of 211.0, and in the morning to begin combat training. By May 17th, it was necessary to prepare for the demonstration exercise for the commanders of the division and regiments of the 3rd Shock Army. From the headquarters of the regiment left late in the evening. On the way the commander reasoned. No, you just imagine that will come division commanders and regimental commanders from the entire army and will learn from us how to attack a well-prepared enemy defence. And that's not all. At the exercises will be the commander of the army, Lieutenant General Yushkevich, and the front commander himself, Army General Yeryomenko. And Yeryomenko's temper is cool. In advance, under the personal leadership of Colonel Shatilov's Sapper Battalion Division, created at height 211.0, strongly fortified stronghold enemy. They dug 3 lines of trenches, built 12 bunkers, and on the back slopes 6 spacious dugouts. In front of the front edge, put in 3 rows of wire fence, everywhere placed targets. For 4 days there was a hard training. Attack followed attack. 20 to 30 times a day, Major Kolchanov returned the company to the original line, and everything began again. Gymnasiums on the soldiers and commanders were wet, in the boots squelched water. The morning of May 17th came. Before dawn the battalion took the initial positions for the offensive. Colonel Voronin arrived and ordered Major Koltunov. With the 4th Company will go into the attack Captain Neustroyev, with the 5th Chief of Staff Captain Kuznetsov, with the 6th Deputy for the political part of Captain Zinchenko. Artillery and mortar fire will control the Deputy Commander of the regiment, Lieutenant Colonel Alexeyev, together with the Chief of Artillery Regiment Captain Zakharov. This decision of the regiment commander was not to Ivan Vasilievich's liking. He began to object to prove why it is not necessary to replace company commander's deputy commander. Voronin boiled up. What are you, Koltunov? Do not fulfill my order. I'm removing you from your post. Remember that the battle is controlled by Alexeyev. I, with Zinchenko and Kuznetsov, had nothing left but to go to the companies. 500 meters behind the initial positions at 10 o'clock, gathered generals, colonels, lieutenant colonels. I, as commander of the 4th Company, called Lieutenant Colonel Alexeyev. The front commander has arrived. In 5 minutes we start. Watch personally for a series of red rockets, the signal of attack. I don't know what happened there, in our rear, what the generals were talking about. What I do know is that the 2nd Battalion acted in the exercises as in a real battle. When we captured the 3rd trench and went in pursuit of the retreating enemy, all the soldiers and commanders were wet. We were sweating in hail. We advanced 3 kilometers deep into the enemy defense and received the order abort. During the night we slept like dead men. In the morning the command of the division and regiment came to the battalion. Colonel Shatilov and Chief of the Political Department Voronin conducted a review of the exercise. We received an excellent assessment. The personnel on behalf of the front commander announced a commendation. We were asked to compile lists of soldiers to award hand watches, which Army General Eremenko issued to those who distinguished themselves. The construction of the 2nd line of defence along the eastern bank of the Velikaya River was finished, and the battalion, being in the divisional rear, had a chance to breathe. We lived according to the peacetime routine. Party and Komsomol meetings were held in all units. Those who distinguished themselves in the last battles and in the training were accepted into the party. Party and Komsomol layer was, as never before, very high, up to 50% of the total number of the battalion. One thing was upsetting: the absence of Major Koltunov in the battalion. Colonel Voronin, as I later learned, had settled some old scores with Ivan Vasilievich. But the command and the political department of the division did not approve the submission of the regiment commander, and, to our joy, the battalion commander soon returned to his post. June 20th, the battalion command, along with the commanders of companies and special units, were called to the front line. It was to pass 15 kilometers. We passed the Goat Ford, a tributary of the Velikaya River. It was shallow, only knee-deep, obviously, that's why it got such a funny name, Goat. Between the hills and heights, through the gullies overgrown with slender birches, where some little birds sang, we came to the edge of the forest between two lakes. On the edge of the forest were our trenches. They were occupied by units of the first echelon. The lakes were connected with each other by a channel. The width of the channel reached 50, the depth in some places more than 2 meters. A serious water obstacle. Steep slopes of height 228.4 started from the western shore of the channel not further than 5-6 meters away. The height was covered with sparse shrubbery. Somewhere on it stood century-old pine trees mutilated by the war, without tops. In the first trench, at the observation post of Vasily Innokentyevich Davidov's battalion, we were met by the regimental commander and the chief of staff, Lieutenant Colonel Utkin. Voronin looked at his watch. Yes, there's nothing to say on time. I'm trying to improve, Comrade Colonel, replied Major Koltunov. Utkin and Captain Davidov, standing next to him, laughed. But no, to business. Interrupted them regimental commander. Captain Fyodor Alexeyevich Arnkin and his commanders came up. Appeared commanders of supporting and attached artillery and tank units. Colonel Voronin very competently, in a commanding manner, introduced the situation. He was a real military man. Except that he was a bit rude, and not always fair. Height 228.4, or, as it was nicknamed by the soldiers, Zayozyanaja, the enemy occupies for 2 months. From it our location is viewed for 8 to 9 kilometers, in some places up to 12. With the mastery of Zayozyana, we deprive the enemy of an important stronghold. We will have the opportunity to enter the battle of large tank and mechanized forces, that is, go to the tactical space. Behind the height of the terrain is only slightly hilly, but mostly flat, and will allow the full use of all the combat equipment. Voronin paused. But to master the height is not easy. On the slopes facing us there are, as you can see, trenches. Behind the reverse slopes, according to our intelligence, strong dugouts in 5 or 6 rows. They are connected with the trenches blocked by 2 trenches with communication lines. The height is defended by units of the 15th SS Division. On the western slopes of Zayozyana, a division of mortars. The defenders are supported by 2 art divisions of 150mm guns. Fascists, covered by the channel and strong defences, feel calm. According to the observations of aerial reconnaissance found that the fascists during the day behind the height of the free rest, even sunbathe. True, at night all the trenches and machine gun points are occupied by troops. During the day remain observers and machine gunners on duty. The colonel again silent, then says with the arrangement, Therefore we will not attack at 7 or 8 o'clock, as usual, but at 10. Intelligence has established precisely that the Nazis from 9 to 10 breakfast. After breakfast they have a smoke break. So let's give them a light. He looked at the commander of the Katyusha division. Everyone laughed. The height Zayozyana seemed not so terrible. We received a combat order, the 2nd Battalion of Major Koltunov, with a company of T-34 tanks, supported by an artillery division, and a division of Katyusha, is advancing in the first echelon with the task to seize the height and gain a foothold on its western slopes. Battalions Davidov and Ionkin to be in the trenches of the initial position and be ready to develop the success of the first echelon of the regiment. Before dawn on June 22nd, companies silently, with the strictest camouflage, took their places. Behind the channel towered Zayozyana. The sun rose. It was quiet, so quiet that we could hear birds fluttering in the bushes. It's getting warm, even hot. The hands of the clock are slowly approaching 10. And then it starts. Katyusha shells flew to the heights like red-hot charcoal. The cannons roared. Mortars slammed. Zayozyana was covered with smoke and dust. In about 10 minutes, German artillery hit our trenches. The earth and, it seems, even the sky rocked and groaned. The fascists put a fixed barrage on the channel. The mines were laid one by one in an even ribbon. Now how to pass through the wall of red-hot metal, through the channel, how to climb up the steep slopes of Zinchenko and reach the trenches. But it had happened before. It has. And we've been through it. We'll pass it now. From the regiment's command centre, a series of green rockets, the signal of attack for the motherland. Following the company, which was led by Grigory Sergeyevich Reshetniak, a senior lieutenant familiar to me from the field hospital, the battalion rushed forward. I, along with the combatant, is at the NP and monitor the companies. Ivan Vasilievich takes the telephone receiver, not shouting as someone at this moment, but slowly, softly, but with force squeezed not from the chest, but from the heart. 710 5th, Ogoni on Object Chataya. He hangs up the phone and immediately turns to the representative of the tankers. Po Ra-A, Ganche Enko to the 5th, Niostro EV to the 4th. Before jumping out of the trenches, I took a quick glance through binoculars and ran the distance of 1.5 kilometers from one lake to another. I saw Grisha Reshetniak, waving his pistol, running down the slope of Zinchenko to the first trench, not more than 100 meters away. Behind him, in a few steps, the liquid chain of his company. On the left flank, the 6th Company, having overcome the channel, climbing the slope. The 5th lay down on the other bank. It is clear why the commander sent there the deputy on the political part of Zinchenko he will raise, no need to doubt. I look at the left flank. The 4th Company is also lying down. We must run. I didn't notice how I swam across the channel and reached the shore. Company Commander Captain Romashov is badly wounded. Straining my voice, I commanded. Rotar, follow me. To the AT-key, forward. I pause for a moment, standing at full height. I see how one, the 2nd, the 3rd, stands up. The company has risen. In the trenches, killed ours and Germans. The wounded are moaning. Here has already passed the company of Senior Lieutenant Grigory Reshetniak. The fight is in the 2nd and 3rd trenches. The company suffered significant losses and exhausted, need help. Battalion 3 rifle companies skip through the trenches and go to the western slopes of Zinchenko. Behind our back, in the trenches, only individual shots are heard. The height is taken. But on the channel, and the entire eastern slope of the Germans are mortar fire, and every minute it intensifies, thicken. In the air showed messers. Moved the battalion headquarters. Kolchinov is already nearby in some trench on the western slope of the height. As before the attack, focused and collected, he commands impressively and imperiously. Liaison men, liaison with the companies. Another minute later follows the command. Dig in. Now will be followed by a counterattack. They dug trenches, pulled communications, dragged guns to direct fire, set up tanks for firing from the spot. Mortars were shooting the western foot of the height. In case of an attack, they were preparing a fixed barrage. Voronin introduced Davidov's battalion into the battle. He took positions to our left. German planes bombed our near-rear areas of firing positions of artillery. By lunchtime, after a short but intense artillery preparation, the Nazis launched a counterattack. From Zinchenko we had a good view. The west was viewed for 10 kilometers. We could see how the German tanks, I counted up to 30 of them, turned on a wide front and moved to the height. Behind the tanks, about 2 kilometers from us, was infantry. You could see it as if on the palm of your hand. Our artillery and mortars opened fire. The enemy chain was covered with smoke. Before evening, Hitlerites again made an attack, but it had no success. The night of June 23rd passed quietly. People rested a little. Battalion Arnkin made up the second echelon of the regiment and was in the German trenches on the eastern slopes of Zinchenko. According to the regimental commander's plan, it could be used as a reserve to strike in the event of an enemy breakthrough. Major Kolchinov took under the battalion headquarters German dugout, roomy and sturdy. Above the head 6 rolls of thick pine logs. However, the dugout had one significant disadvantage: the door looked to the west, towards the enemy, and German bullets could fly into it. As soon as dawn broke, the Nazis opened fire on the height. The shells and mines were laying down tightly. There was a continuous roll of thunder. Everything howled, and Zaoznaya seemed to sway. The fascist artillery preparation was going on for about 30 minutes. But it seemed that it began long ago, as if yesterday. Under cover of fire, German tanks and infantry came to the foot of the height. When the Nazis transferred the fire to the depth of our defence, the attackers were already on the slopes of Zauzena, no further than 200 metres from our trench. Tanks began to go around the height on the right and left. The infantry was climbing the ridge. Shaking off the earth and sand, soldiers and commanders were rising from the bottom of the trenches. Everyone was waiting for the command. The fascists came closer. Here they are already 150 metres. Here in 120 metres. Fire! Fire! The crackle of machine gun bursts, the roar of Katyusha, the whine of direct-fire guns. Everything mixed up. Not more than 50 Germans, and that in different places, ran to our trenches and were destroyed by grenades. The smoke has cleared. There's no one in front of us. The counterattack was repulsed. German planes appeared. They turned around and went into a dive to the height of Zaozena. Again the ground shook. After the airstrike was followed by an artillery raid. The division commander put into battle the 674th Rifle Regiment of Lieutenant Colonel Alexei Ivanovich Pinchuk, former commander of the 151st Brigade. Our battalion was thinning, and the defence area was reduced. Now we occupied only the northern part of the height, and the right flank rested on Lake Korfoino. Colonel Shatilov moved the division's observation post to Zaozana. I saw several times as he went around the positions of the companies, encouraging and giving advice to commanders. He walked along the trenches in full height, without ducking, and they were shallow on the western slope. They had not had time to dig to the full profile. It was felt that the commander is a man of excellent courage. We, the commanders, somehow immediately changed his attitude. The Germans, after another artillery attack again, went on the attack. This time, not counting losses, they threw more and more forces into the battle, and they managed to break a gap on the right flank of the 4th Company. Hitlerites bypassed the height and rushed to the crossing, brought by sappers tonight. But the 4th Company continued to defend. The fight came to hand-to-hand combat. The forces, however, were unequal. The Germans threw in the breakthrough to a reinforced battalion with tanks. From the defenders of the right flank, almost no one was left. They were killed. Fresh German units approached the breakthrough. A critical situation was created. And then, on Shatilov's order, the 674th Regiment went into counterattack. The enemy could not withstand and began to retreat, but he retreated from line to line systematically, providing stubborn resistance. It took another push, another pressure, at least a small one, to turn the enemy into flight. This was perfectly understood by Major Koltunov. He promptly jumped out of the trench and led the battalion to the flank of the retreating enemy. The blow was unexpected. The fascists, throwing machine guns, leaving the guns, ran. Fascist losses for June 22nd and 23 were thousands of killed and wounded, but we lost a lot. Before dawn we were brought breakfast. The companies were replenished with ammunition. In our headquarters dugout were put 3 boxes of rockets, 100 pieces in each, and a bucket of gasoline, which served instead of kerosene for lighting. In front of the entrance to the dugout was a wide, collapsed from the fire trench. To make it half narrower, they made it with coils of telephone cable. Koltunov ordered gasoline and boxes with rockets to put also in the passage. We wanted to have breakfast, as on the right flank again machine guns rumbled, machine guns crackled. Combat sent me to find out the situation. No sooner had I run to the company than the shooting stopped. Acting commander of the 4th Company, Junior Sergeant Nikolai Stepanovich Solovnikov, reported. The Germans showed up, but hid. How many? 5 men. I returned to the headquarters. We started to have breakfast. It was quite quiet, and suddenly a shell burst in the passage in front of the dugout door. No one was hit by the shrapnel, but telephone coils, rockets, gasoline were thrown into the dugout by the blast wave. The gasoline burst into flames, rockets from the boxes spilled out and began to burst, and there were 300 of them. The telephone cable, doused with gasoline, caught fire. At first we couldn't understand what happened. It was like a dream. It was impossible to jump out of the dugout. There were no windows, only one door, and in it flames were raging, rockets were bursting. I was blinded and lost consciousness. In the medical center, I found out the commander and Captain Zinchenko were badly burned. My orderly Mitya Kashutin had both hands amputated. I also suffered a lot. My face and hands were burned. I could not see anything. I thought I was blinded. Only a month later, when the crust began to come off, a narrow slit was formed in my right eye, through which a murky light leaked out. I was glad about that. I was lying in the hospital in the town of Ostashkov, which in the summer of the 44th year had already become a deep rear. German aviation did not bomb us. The fascists did not care about our rear. The front was cracking at all seams. Soviet troops were approaching the state border. Every day the radio transmitted joyful news. A large group was surrounded. An important railroad junction was taken. The city was liberated. In one of the orders I heard to declare gratitude and assign the name Idritskaya, 150th Rifle Division. On July 21st, the radio reported, yesterday a group of German generals made an assassination attempt on Hitler. We, wounded, hotly discussed what was happening, how I wanted to go to the front. But I was bedridden. I was discharged from the hospital only on September 2nd. I was entrusted to be a commander. In the personnel department of the army, I received awards: the Order of Patriotic War of the 2nd degree for Poplevy and the Order of Patriotic War of the 1st degree for the height of 228.4. I received a direction to his division as commander of a rifle battalion. The division commander was not found at the headquarters. Colonel Dyakov, the new chief of staff, said that he was at the observation post of the 674th Rifle Regiment, which was repelling attacks. He paused and added, "The situation is heavy." I went to look for an observation post. In front of the river Ogra was fighting. The enemy trying to prevent the exit of parts of the 150th. Division to the river went into counterattack. I searched for the division commander. I looked, and on his shoulders general's epaulettes. He spoke on the phone, and I waited for the right moment, and then reported. Captain Nestroyev, after hospitalization, came for further service as commander of a rifle battalion. Handed the general a direction. Mikhailov, Shatilov turned to the unfamiliar to me Lieutenant Colonel, send instead of Major Strizhnev. Mikhailov turned out to be my regimental commander. Although there was a battle and ahead, on the hills, spreading smoke, Lieutenant Colonel briefly introduced me to the situation. It is necessary to hold the line at all costs. The commander had just been wounded there, and, it seems, badly in the stomach. Go, he finished, and looked at me. I had not had time to move away even 100 meters, as the NP was covered with artillery fire. Lieutenant Colonel Mikhailov was wounded. At the battalion observation post, with binoculars in his hands in the trench, stood Captain Pronin, my deputy. At the bottom of the trench squatted Chief of Staff Captain Chepelev and wrote something. Well, here I am again on the front line, again in battle. It was September 14th, 1944. In Latvia, the fighting was of a special nature. Hitler and the high command of the Nazi troops attached great importance to the Baltics. They tried to keep it in their hands at any cost, as it covered East Prussia. Every city and town, every height was prepared for defence. Every metre of Latvian land was taken with a fight. I had to be in continuous fighting for almost 2 months, or rather 53 days and nights. We took farms and nameless heights. We lost battle friends. We were replenished and moved west again. He grew a beard. He lost weight. He could speak only in a whisper. He had torn his voice. On October 28th, he was wounded in the hand of his right arm. A small fragment of a shell lodged in the bone. The wound was bandaged by an orderly of some rifle company. I don't even remember who, threw a meter bandage over my neck, tied the ends of it on my chest in a knot, put my hand in the garter, and asked, "Good combat?" "Good," I answered, and stayed in the battle. Passed through the forest, through some swamp, and again the hills. Again high rises girdled with barbed wire. We passed the town of Dobel, burned and destroyed to the ground by the Nazis, and again went deep into the swampy forest. There was firing everywhere, the sound of heavy guns. On November 6th, not only my battalion, but the whole division was attacked by the enemy from the village of Kursy. The fascists were coming through. Not counting losses, they threw more and more new forces into the battle. We had to raise and lead the battalion in counterattacks 3 times before lunchtime on the eve of the Great October Revolution. Major Sergei Chernobrovkin, a favourite of the division, was killed. Killed commander of the 3rd Battalion Andrei Matveyev. Severely wounded Captain Chepelov. At the 3rd counterattack, when we on the shoulders of the retreating enemy almost broke into his trench, I was hit on the legs. I fell down. Wounded again, and this time badly. I was hospitalized for the 5th time and arrived at the regiment, still limping on my right leg. The division was already in Poland, near the town of Minsk-Mazowiecki. I went to the headquarters and reported. Colonel Zinchenko, the commander of the 756th Regiment, met me cordially, asked me about my health and well-being, offered to have a meal together. I could see that he was very concerned. When we sat down at the table, Zinchenko said, "The last battles in Latvia were heavy. The regiment has 2 rifle battalions in battalions of 70-80 people. We will be replenished. We will form a 3rd battalion. You'll form it." His orderly had already set the table. Dinner was modest 1 small steamed cutlet, paper-thin slices of Dutch cheese. "Well, comrade combat, shall we eat?" He moved the plate with bread closer to me. I waited for something, looked furtively at the door, behind which the orderly hid. But it was quiet. I was freezing. I was riding in the back of a car full of crates. I wanted to warm my soul with a glass. "Comrade Nestrayev, eat," said the colonel. I realized that I wouldn't wait for vodka. Later I learned that the regiment commander does not drink and does not keep any alcoholic beverages. That's how I met the new regiment commander. With him I went from Warsaw to Berlin, and I am glad that I served with him. The colonel was cautious, judicious, but not without courage in conducting combat operations. As for his personal courage, it was an example for me. In the first days of January here, near Minsk-Mazowiecki, not far from Warsaw, we received replenishment. My 3rd battalion was formed. I didn't have to do combat training for a long time. The troops of the 1st Belarusian Front, which included our 3rd Shock Army, were preparing for the Vistula Oder operation. It was an extraordinary operation, both in its objectives and in scope, in the very pace of the offensive. At that time, of course, we did not know the plan of the command, even on the scale of the army, not to mention the front. But everyone felt that we had to accomplish something very significant. Let me start by saying at least that the battalion had never been as full as it was in those January days. We received a lot of automatic weapons. There was a lot of artillery stationed around us in the woods. There was another reason for high spirits. The battles for nameless heights and small villages were over for us. Somewhere ahead was Warsaw, and from it the way led to other big cities, of course, to Berlin. From these thoughts, even breathtaking. Everyone realized that in this offensive we would certainly come to the land of fascist Germany. Let's see what it is, this cursed land from which the war crawled across the world. January 14, at dawn ahead, somewhere beyond the Vistula, artillery preparation rumbled, and we were still standing in the forest. The battle was on a wide front, and that was good. It began. A huge offensive began. Later we learned that the troops of the 1st Belarusian Front made 2 strikes that day, the main one from Magniszewski bridgehead and auxiliary from Polkowo. Our army at the first stage was assigned a secondary role. It remained in the reserve of the front. but later we moved to the first echelon. On January 15th, we were taken to the initial area to the eastern bank of the Vistula River, to Prague, a suburb of the Polish capital. On the western bank stood Warsaw. On the fourth day of the offensive, the troops of the First Belarusian Front, under the command of Marshal Zhukov, advanced far to the west and made a deep encirclement of Warsaw. The Germans were forced to abandon it. We marched through Warsaw at night. The fascists completely destroyed the city. Piles of bricks and stone were left of it. When I looked at the ruins, my heart clenched. Day and night, the 150th Division moved forward in regimental columns. They rested no more than 4 or 5 hours a day. These were tiring marches, but no one complained, and the front was rolling more and more rapidly to the west. We were rushed forward as fast as possible. In those days there was a peculiar situation. The First Belarusian Front had already advanced to the Oder, and its right neighbour, the Second Belarusian Front, whose main forces were turned against the encircled East Prussian grouping, fell behind. Actually, its left flank, which was fighting on the Vistula, fell behind. Thus, between the fronts formed a huge gap. The enemy could break into it from eastern Pomerania at any time. For him, every day was a real opportunity to strike in the flank and rear of the First Belarusian Front. And the Germans had a lot of forces there. To secure his flank, the commander of the front, Marshal Zhukov, ordered our army, as well as some associations, to turn sharply to the northwest. Now we went only forced marches. We had to pass 152 kilometers, and here new hardships awaited us. On the march we were caught by a ferocious storm. A long and tearing howl rolled across the ground and the sky. In the face, like a dry broom, prickly snow whipped. Nothing could be seen in 5 paces around. We were walking in separate battalion columns. We had lost the road long ago. The snow was above our knees, in some places up to our waists. Where to find it, this road, we don't know. Everything was covered with a snowy haze. I stepped aside and let the companies pass me. The soldiers, like ghosts, fell into the milky abyss, fell without noise or shouting. I felt creepy. Where are we going? My contact, Petya Pyatnitsky, shielded me with his body from the raging elements. His eyes, narrow as slits, looked at me expectantly. I felt that he wanted to help me in some way. But how? At any moment, Petya could take off his overcoat, cover me, and stay in a shirt. I knew that, but what was needed now was something else. I threw off my overcoat and handed it to Pyatnitsky. Cover it. I'll look at the map. He didn't hear. There was howling and whistling all around. I pulled him to me and shouted in his ear, "Cover me with a tent. Cover me with a tent." Finally he understood. I crouched under the tent, staring at the tablet. But what could it tell me? There are no landmarks around. I'm freezing. My teeth are chattering. I wave my hand to Pyatnitsky. Let's go. Yes, of course, let's go. Why look at a map now? When you do not know where you are, the map will not help. Now run, catch up with the head of the column. But nothing, at least we'll warm up. The column stops, people fall down, many fall asleep at once. The snow covers them from above. Why did Captain Yaranov, my new deputy in formation, stop the battalion? The road. The road combat. I understood rather than heard the words. I stomped my foot firmly. There was indeed a road. It stretched across our movement, was deserted and dead. Not a trace, not a soul. Which way to go? Right or left? It doesn't matter, we have to go. And then we'll get somewhere. I sent forward Pyatnitsky with 2 machine gunners and ordered to raise the battalion. Let's move. Strictly stick to the road. It is swept with snowdrifts, like waves, and it is easy to lose our way. Not more than an hour passed. I was about to take a break, as Pyatnitsky came out of the snow cloud. There are some houses ahead. I could hear dogs barking. Probably sheepdogs. I left the machine gunners by the road. If anything, they'll come running. My thoughts overtake one another. Maybe there's a German outpost? or a line of defence? Machinally by habit, I give the order to Guselikov, his company goes head. 8th Company to turn around and take the defence. Chief of Staff, along with Pyatnitsky and a group of soldiers sent to the huts. Immediately call the commanders of units, and while waiting for them, shelter from the wind behind a high snowdrift. My thoughts are not cheerful. Suddenly the Germans, maybe even with tanks. And Zinchenko is good. Several times deployed radio silent. But what's the regiment commander got to do with it? I myself led the battalion to hell knows where. Comrade Combat, the commander of the 7th Company, Captain Kuksin, showed up on your orders. Taut, slender, fresh, as if there was no heavy march, Kuksin's report took me out of my thoughts. I looked up. The company officer was standing at attention. Sit next to him. There is to sit next to me. Even in such an environment, Captain Kuksin, as a military man, was impeccable. Pankratov came. This tiredly raised his hand to his cap and simply said, Pankratov. In the company everything is normal. When all the commanders gathered, I set the task. The battalion took a circular defence. By that time the snowstorm began to subside. In the distance, where the Chief of Staff left with the soldiers, the roofs of houses began to loom. The languid minutes of waiting dragged on. Gusev returned cheerful and lively. Here, combat and the end of torment. There is a village. The Germans left it. The village is intact. Fatigue was removed as if it never existed, and the soldiers' mood changed at once. I was walking along the column and heard a joking conversation. How well entrenched in the snow we could sit in the defence, but no, leave the defence and go somewhere. I've been at the front for almost 3 years, and how many defensive fortifications I built. I have fewer hairs on my head. Well, Semyon, they answered him, if you count on your head, then you have not built these fortifications much. That's right. He has as much hair on his head as a woman on her knee. A friendly laughter sounds. Why are you laughing? Says the petty officer angrily. You would have measured another 50 kilometers across the virgin land, you would probably stop laughing. Don't make noise, petty officer. Measure us even 100 kilometers. You've got something to scare us with. On the second day by evening the whole regiment gathered in one of the settlements. In the blizzard our battalion, though deviated from its direction, but not much, about 7 kilometers. We followed the compass strictly to the west, and the west is an unmistakable landmark. The headquarters of the regiment was located on the outskirts, in an ancient castle. Battalions were located in peasant huts, covered with straw. That day Zinchenko gathered all the commanders of battalions and special units to review the march. I walked up the wide marble steps of the rich panoramic castle and thought, here it is, capitalism without embellishments. Here luxury, in the hut's poverty. The floors in the corridor were parquet, burning with fire. Expensive, elaborate chandeliers hung from the ceiling in the long corridor, and in the peasant hut's dirt floors, through the blinded windows barely penetrates the light. Most of them have cattle here, in the hut. Kostyrkin and Bove were the first to report. Battalion's convoys came still not completely. Batteries of 45mm guns bogged down 15 kilometers away. A lot of horses fell. The second day there is no forage. People are sitting on dry rations, but it is running out. In general, the situation was difficult. And not only in our regiment. Things were no better in many other units. We have travelled a long way, torn away from their bases. In addition, a lot of difficulties brought us winter, snowy and harsh. The roads were covered with snow. We often walked on virgin land. In February, the offensive was suspended. More than 40 years have passed since then. Many people to this day vividly remember that time. They talk and discuss various details. Some are trying to revise the Vistula Oder operation, saying that in February 1945 it was necessary to capture Berlin and thus end the war. I am a small commander. It is not for me to judge the operation on the whole scale. But I know that in February 1945 our rear was lagging behind, and we lacked a lot of things. People were experiencing extreme fatigue, and the ranks of fighters had thinned considerably. The troops needed rest. After heavy crossings, the Polish land was left behind. We crossed the old pre-war Polish-German border. We received an order to take the defence front to the north. The 756th Regiment was stationed in the area of the small town of Fletow. To the southwest, in Schneidermahl, there was fighting. Although the fortress with encircled German troops remained in our deep rear, the Nazis continued to resist. They rejected Soviet offers to lay down arms. On February 14th, the enemy at the cost of huge losses broke through the encirclement ring and moved strictly to the north in eastern Pomerania, where a large group of Nazi troops was concentrated. Hitler planned to use it for a flank attack on the troops of the First Belarusian Front, standing on the Oder. Colonel Zinchenko set the task the 3rd Battalion immediately on the alert to move to the height of 69.5, through which passes the road from Schneidermahl to Pomerania, take the defence and delay the enemy's advance until the approach of the main forces of the regiment. The battalion settled the road in time and entrenched on the height. The Nazis had not yet appeared. I checked the battalion defence area for the 10th time. Everything seemed to be fine. In the afternoon, an enemy column appeared. It not even went, but wandered disorganised without reconnaissance. I decided to let it get closer, 500, 400, 300 metres. I give the command. Fire. Machine guns and automatic rifles mowed down the head of the column. Captain Morgan's mortars and Captain Wolfson's guns hit the tail. Everything stirred. The enemy first lay down. Then, under our fire, losing hundreds of dead, began to deploy in a chain. The Hitlerites built the combat order deeply echeloned. I counted 8 dense chains. The Germans 4 times rose to the attack, suffered losses, but again accumulated and came at us. And lay down. In the evening they were attacked in the flank by Berv's and Kasturkin's battalions and defeated. Few of them reached the forest near the height. I looked at the field where the battle had just been fought and thought, this, Fritz, is not 41st or 42nd year for you. This is 1945. The battalion lost up to 20 men. The enemy up to 800. In addition, about 500 Hitlerites we took prisoner. For the liquidation of the breakthrough Schneidermahl group, the soldiers and commanders were awarded orders and medals. I was awarded the Order of Alexander Nevsky. In February, the general situation was as follows. The troops of the 1st Belarusian and 1st Ukrainian fronts penetrated deeply into the enemy's defence, reached the boundary of the Oder and Mies rivers, but from eastern Pomerania our troops were still threatened by a strong group of Nazi troops. On March 1st, our troops went on the offensive in Pomerania to eliminate the threat from the north. The spring of 1945 was unusual for us. We met it on German soil. In those days the weather was warm but gloomy. The grey cover of low-hanging clouds obscured the March sun. It was often drizzling fine rain. For the 6th day, the 150th Idritz Rifle Division, under the command of General V.M. Shatilov, pursued the retreating enemy in eastern Pomerania. On wide highways the Nazis were rolling back to the north. And finally the 756th Infantry Regiment came to Kamen, a stronghold of the enemy defence, which we managed to break through from the start. Hitlerites hastily left the streets and quarters of this small town to force the Bay of Stettin and go to its western shore. Our battalion stormed the southeastern outskirts of Kamen. The enemy's withdrawal here was covered by machine gunners who were hiding in the cemetery and in the grove. They were firing heavily. On my order, mortars of Captain Mikhail Morgan and machine gunners of Senior Lieutenant Nikolai Samsonov quickly opened fire and silenced the enemy fire points. Meanwhile, the soldiers of the rifle companies by short runs reached the cemetery and broke into the street leading to the centre of the city. Parts of the division entered Kamen. The arrival of Soviet troops in the town caused panic among the locals. 2 or 3 families at a time, they climbed into one apartment, closed the shutters and waited in fear to see what would happen next. Our regiment took several hundred Hitler's soldiers, a lot of military equipment, wagons, including about 30 vehicles with ammunition and food. Gradually, the firing quieted down. Our battalion was taken out to the second echelon of the regiment. But the enemy was still in the vicinity. My battalion chief of staff, Senior Lieutenant Gusev, and I were observing from the attic of a dilapidated house. Gusev did not have a thorough military training, but he had frontline experience and always helped me well in a difficult moment. He knew topography quite well, carefully practiced maps and other staff documents. Before us opened a picture of disorderly retreat of the enemy. Defeated enemy regiments fled in panic, abandoning tanks, guns, wagons. The fascists tried to get across the bay using barges, boats, but shells of our artillery caught up with them, and many overloaded vessels went down. Many enemy soldiers who had no time to flee were pinned down by Soviet soldiers and forced to lay down their arms. Having cleared Kamin from Hitlerites, our division took the defence on the coast of Szczeciński Bay. After hot, exhausting battles and big passages, there came a respite. The gloomy, monotonous days dragged on. In overcast weather, there was rarely a gap in the clouds, a patch of blue sky. A dense, milky fog hung over the bay, and then it was as if a huge cluster of white, fluffy, absorbent cotton descended on the water. On the shore, scattered far apart, stood tile-roofed houses and barns. Against the general gloomy background, they looked unfriendly. The soldiers of our battalion were placed in hastily equipped trenches, in some places covered with poles, scraps of boards, covered with a thin layer of damp earth. Water penetrated through the ceiling and got behind the collars of the soldiers. In the days of calm, each of them began to remember their relatives and Russian towns and villages dear to their hearts more often. Guys, in our Bryansk region, spring is probably also in full swing. The streams murmur. The sparrows chirp more cheerfully, said Petya Pyatnitsky, raising the collar of his overcoat to shelter from the rain, and his gaze was directed into the distance. Evdokia, my wife, writes that the village is already preparing for sowing. The seeds are there, but there are not enough workers. Where will they come from? There are only old men and women left. Clearly it's not easy for them without us. That's right, Petro, you say. Ilya Sarnov confirmed. It's hard not only for us, when sometimes you feel death breathing in your face. They also had to suffer bitter tears, and most of all those who had lived under the fascists. My village, Soviets, was burned to the ground by the fascists, Pyatnitsky said sadly. But brothers, the worst is over. Soon the fascist will be finished, and we will go home. We will raise everything again. I can't even believe that such a day will come. Oh, what a celebration it will be. And the conversation flowed quietly, revealing the soldiers' thoughts, feelings and experiences. Peter Pyatnitsky told his friends about the Bryansk forests, Sarnov about Kustanay, about the grassy steppes of Kazakhstan, Zazulya about Ukraine. Each dreamed about his own close to his heart, but all together about one thing about the motherland, the people who were looking forward to victory. In those days I heard many stories about soldiers' fates. Almost all of them were sad. Here's one of them. A young soldier, Vasya Kondratenko, told me we lived in Ukraine, in a district town near Kharkov. We had a large family. My father worked at a factory. My mother was a housewife. Grisha, my older, 19-year-old brother, worked together with my father at the factory. I studied at school. And there were also two younger sisters. My father and older brother went to the front in the first days of the war. My mother went to work at the factory as an apprentice turner. She rarely came home, sometimes in 2 or 3 days, or even less often. She would come home, see how we lived, and then go back to the factory. I was the boss of the house. I dropped out of school. The Germans started bombing the city almost every night. I would hear the air raid alarm, put on my sisters, and run down the street to the bomb shelter. Autumn nights are dark and rainy. It's cold, very cold. Our anti-aircraft guns are beating. Searchlights are shining across the sky. From their rays on the street seems even darker. Soon the ground and air are split by terrible explosions of German bombs. Glass is flying, roofs of houses are collapsing, and there are more and more bomb bursts. It's scary, very scary. My sisters are crying, their teeth are chattering from cold and fear. I would run with them to the bomb shelter, which as luck would have it was far from our house, and sit there until morning. And so every night. And on the morning of November 27th, returning from the bomb shelter, we saw that our house was destroyed. We were left in the middle of the street in old tattered coats. The new, better things had been sold long ago, and the rest, what we still had, was lost in the ruins of the house. I went to the factory to look for my mother. She put us with an acquaintance somewhere on the outskirts of the city. She herself went back to work. Letters from my father and brother came very rarely. In December, Grisha sent a letter. He was badly wounded. Mother did not have time to dry her tears with us. As the terrible news came, my father died. In the winter of 1942, our factory was evacuated to the deep rear. Many people travelled directly on open platforms together with the equipment. On the way, several times German airplanes struck. We thought we would never make it, we would get killed on the way. In 1942, I started working. And when I turned 18, I joined the army. I joined your battalion. I'll be a year old soon. My mother writes that my sisters are sick, her head has turned white. And my mother was beautiful, red-cheeked, with black curly hair. But nothing she writes, I fulfill the plan by 150 to 180%. After Vasia's story, everyone was silent for a long time. It's all right, we'll get through it, he concluded. In these days, officers of the regimental staff often went into the trenches to the soldiers to talk to them. Once in the evening I was sneaking along the message line to the command post, and at the turn I met Senior Lieutenant Prilov, the regimental agitator. "Where are you going?" I asked him. "To the soldiers. To smoke, to talk. Let's go together." Following us was Prilov's constant companion, the orderly Vasil. Everyone in the regiment knew this 18-year-old young man who had voluntarily joined the Soviet army. Small in stature, with a characteristic soft voice, Vasil resembled a perky teenage girl. We jumped into the trench. On the liquid, sticky mud approached a group of fighters. A soldier warms himself with smoke, shaves with an orwell, but he is still as cheerful as ever. He smiles cheerfully. Prilov began and continued. "Well, have you settled in well, boys? Have you burrowed deep?" The agitator of the regiment, Prilov, called all soldiers, sergeants and officers with warmth of heart, although some of them were already over 50. He was loved in the regiment, and everyone knew that in a difficult moment, when homesickness, memories of fallen comrades or bitter thoughts about combat failures squeeze the heart, the agitator always has a warming word warming the soul, sparkling humour and fun joke. "Is it true that here we will guard the fascists?" Ivan Zozulia addressed us. "Don't believe every rumour," Prilov objected. "We won't stay here long, we must hurry." Prilov paused, then finished his thought quite unexpectedly. "Yes, we must hurry home. There aren't many workers left in the village, and we're about to sow." That's right," said the soldiers in unison. "We'll make up our minds," Prilov summarized cheerfully. "We must finish the enemy as soon as possible. And the land we are guarding now used to belong to the Poles. We'll give it to them, let them live in good health. But the road home lies only through Berlin." "Berlin, you say?" "It's all right to go to Berlin, too. But other units may be sent to Berlin, and I, brothers, would like to visit it and establish my own order there," said Soldier Ivanov. For a long time we talked with the soldiers. Late in the evening, Junior Lieutenant Novitsky, adjutant of the regiment commander, came to us. He told me that Colonel Zinchenko ordered to immediately prepare the men for a long march. "Build the battalion over there, behind the slopes of the hills on the highway," I said to Captain Yaranov, the deputy for formation, who came up. He dashingly threw back his cloak and led the company along the line of communication to the rear. I went to the battalion command post. The section of the defence was transferred to the Polish battalion. Our division had to pass about 200 kilometres in 4 days and concentrate in the area of Lake Mantel. In full combat gear, soldiers gathered to form a general marching column, and here, by the roadside, rolled up their skatki, changed their shoes, adjusted their equipment more tightly. Soon General Shatilov arrived at the battalion. He jumped off his horse and handed it to his orderly. I went to the commander and reported that the battalion is preparing to march. He warmly greeted and with his usual correctness offered, "Let's go and see." Calmly unhurried gate commander approached the soldiers who were adjusting the equipment. Seeing the general, they stood up. "How are you?" Shatilov asked. "So far, everything is fine, Comrade General. Here we are thinking, calculating, how far will we have to go?" The soldiers peppered the commander with questions. 200 kilometers. "Better prepare your shoes, do not allow scuffs on the way, or the road will seem long," advised Vasily Mitrofanovich half-jokingly. "We are used to crossings. It's not the first time. I believe and hope." Shatilov's clean-shaven face lit up with a satisfied smile. He wished the soldiers success and went on. "After checking our battalion, General Shatilov on horseback rode around the other regiments, gathered commanders of units to instruct them how to organize and conduct the march. We will make the crossing at night," he warned. "People will have to endure a lot of physical strain. Take care of the nutrition of the soldiers. Hot food must always be given out on time. Maintain combat readiness, discipline. Remember the war continues, and there may be all sorts of surprises. On the way there will be swamps, possibly ambushes." Late in the evening the regiments moved on the road. In the tail of the columns went wagons with ammunition, food and various military equipment. Gusev and I rode on horseback ahead of the battalion. We stopped by the side of the road to see how the companies were passing. Look at the 7th Company. Although it is difficult, but the soldiers are walking as if on parade, I say Gusev. Ahead of the company confident gait went Captain Kuksin, by nature hot, fiery, not lacking excessive arrogance. Then came the 8th led by Captain Guselnikov. Heavy in appearance, he stepped firmly, and when he got up to us, on his broad cheekbone face reflected a cheerful smile, as if saying nothing, we'll get there. Guselnikov is a crystal honest, soulful man. He is one of those who, without fear of trouble, bravely tells the truth in the eye, does not tolerate falsity and injustice. There goes the 9th Mortar. And finally passes by us machine gun company. Its commander, Senior Lieutenant Samsonov, winked slyly at the right flanker, and together they belted out a song, A, Roads, Dust and Fog. We first met Nikolai Samsonov near Warsaw. He came to our battalion from the hospital after a heavy wound received in the battles for the liberation of Latvia. Samsonov was a civil engineer from Sverdlovsk. I immediately liked him for his kindness, sincerity, affection for his native Urals. Under the cover of night the units were moving along a slightly hilly plain. Along the roadsides, stretched slender rows of fruit and ornamental trees. Refugees were often seen, some travelling in cars, carts and bicycles, others on foot. The human stream moved westward and eastward. Large wagons loaded with boxes, chests, feather beds and other household goods carried entire families. Not so long ago they lived in the deep rear, far from the hot war, and now the war came to their homes, and people abandoned their homes and fled in fear along the roads. One morning during a halt the soldiers ate hot porridge from cauldrons. Nearby there was a farm with up to 100 cows. They had probably not been milked for 2 or 3 days. Each cow's udders were swollen. They were mooing loudly. "No, I can't stand it any longer," said Private Filipov, a man of advanced years, a villager accustomed to order on the farm, and his usually good-natured face took on a determined expression. "I'm going to milk." "And in what a cap," sneered the young soldier. On the ground. The young soldiers began to tease and drop witticisms, and the older ones, yesterday's collective farmers, went together with Filipov. I looked after them and thought the soldier's heart longed for peaceful labour. The command sounded, and the regiments moved forward again through the unfamiliar land, passing vast forests and frequent German villages with monotonous stone houses. The march was orderly. It was the clear, cloudless morning of the 4th day of our march. In front of us lay the fields, and in the distance, on the left, stretched out the calm surface of a large lake. A little away from the road we could see a hillock. This was our destination. Even from afar we noticed at the edge of the grove several Willis and a dozen horsemen. Corps headquarters, I thought. The assumption was justified. Soon among the group of officers I recognized the familiar stocky figure of General Perevertkin. Immediately a brawny horseman, Junior Lieutenant Novitsky, adjutant of the regiment commander, flew up to the head of the battalion column. To the regiment commander, "They're the commander of the corps and the division commander," he shouted, nodding his head pointing toward the hill. I left Yaronov in my place and followed the adjutant. On the hill near the corps commander already stood General Shatilov, Colonel Zinchenko, Captain Bove and several other people. When all the summoned officers gathered, the regimental commander in the most concise form set us a task. In a few hours the regiments settled in the villages spread around the lake. The division headquarters was stationed in the village of Klein Mantel. Some units entered the military town, from which stretched an asphalted road to the deserted airfield. Our regiment occupied a 3-story barracks, girded by full-profile trenches dug by the Nazis. The battalion was assigned the first floor. After the march the men were given a day's rest. The soldiers first cleaned their weapons, slept, and then began to put their uniforms and equipment in order, washed and shaved, telling various tall tales and stories from the front life. By noon in the back of the corridor someone was already playing simple melodies on an accordion, as if attracting the soldiers who wanted to sing to their camp music. Some went outside to get some fresh air, to see how people lived here, until yesterday. Concerned, I returned to the battalion from the regimental commander. Tomorrow I had to start systematic combat training. I went into the staff room. At the table sit Gusev and Lieutenant Berest, my new deputy in political part. Both bent over the papers. "What are you doing?" "Formalization of award lists for those who distinguished themselves in the last battles." "That's right. Colonel Zinchenko asks that we submit these materials to him without delay. It'll take a night, but it'll be done by morning." "We'll manage." "You know, Kuzma, gather all the commanders of companies and special units by 18 o'clock. We'll talk about the tasks that the regiment commander has set before us, and you'll take care of the awards after the meeting." Gusev immediately called the duty officer and gave him the order to gather the officers. Waiting for their arrival, Berest and I and Gusev again and again thought about how to better organize combat and political training. We sketched out a plan, outlined the main topics for practicing tactical, fire and formation training, made a daily schedule. As if we were living in peacetime. Schedules. Combat training. Gusev grinned good-naturedly, looking at his papers. "It's coming to that, Kuzma," came into the lair of the enemy. "Peace, I think, is not far off. And in order to live to see that day sooner, we must study, improve our skills." Engrossed in work and conversation, we didn't notice how time passed. "May I?" Opening the door, asked Captain Guselnikov. "Come in." "Ivan." I pulled out my watch. The hands showed 18.00. I looked at Guselnikov and thought of him executive commander, always accurate. Following Guselnikov in the room entered Captain Kuksin, Senior Lieutenant Samsonov, Pankratov, Misha Morgan and other officers. The tedious transition did not seem to have made any imprint on them. They had time to shave, to sew up clean cuffs, to shine their boots. But Lieutenant Berest, who liked to flaunt his dress code, was especially distinguished by his neatness. For the sake of importance, he had grown a small, narrow moustache and carefully groomed it. The officers were rested and cheerful, and a lively conversation immediately ensued between them. "Ivan, have you lost your gun?" Kuksin teased Guselnikov, and at the same time winked at Berest. "You're joking. When I meet a fascist face-to-face, my gun is better than any gun," parries Guselnikov. The pistol TT, which he got somewhere, was the envy of officers who had nagans, and Guselnikov, like a child, was proud of it and did not miss an opportunity to tell once again about the story at Schneidermühl. There he and his soldiers, repulsing the onslaught of the enemy, shot all the ammunition, and the Nazis pressed on. The captain instantly changed the clip and killed a German officer, who pounced on him from behind the turn of the trench. Since then, Guselnikov never parted with his pistol. Guselnikov was about to give some details, but I had to stop him. You'll tell me later, but now let's get down to business. In the room established silence. Commanders took out notebooks, pencils, and prepared to listen. I gave them detailed instructions of the regimental commander. First of all, companies and batteries were required to staff up to the regular staff and achieve cohesion of units. We had to take young, untrained soldiers, teach them to use weapons, to advance in chains, to attack, to fight hand-to-hand in the trenches, to block pillboxes, to act as part of tank landings. Great importance was attached to training soldiers, sergeants and officers in forcing water obstacles and advancing in night conditions. I'm not quite clear how to conduct physical training, Kuksin asked. We have little time, I answer him. Therefore, during the hours of physical training, every soldier should be taught hand-to-hand combat techniques. This is the main thing. And political training how? Asked Guselnikov. There will be a seminar. We need to make people aware that outside our homeland they need to hold the honor and dignity of Soviet soldiers especially high, to ensure that they correctly understand the international situation and their specific tasks, prepare for the political classes thoroughly. Replenishment will arrive soon? Worried Samsonov. It is already at the regimental headquarters. By subtle outward signs, gestures, hurried notes, which were kept by company commanders, it was felt that people understand the importance of the tasks before them. We were in the center of Europe, in the lair of fascism. We came here through fire and storm, crushing the enemy, before whom the armies of many nations laid down their arms. Soviet soldiers marched on the land of Poland, Romania, Austria, Bulgaria, Czechoslovakia, Yugoslavia, Germany as flag-bearers of freedom. And in these moments, each of us realized training, shooting, and camouflage, physical hardening and political classes, small milestones on the way to a great, great victory, which we all dreamed of from the first days of the war. I understood the thoughts of my comrades. I believed that they were well aware of their tasks, and therefore I thought it unnecessary to remind them of it once again. Our business conversation ended, and the commanders went to their units. Lieutenant Berest, deputy for political part, and Lieutenant Petrov, the battalion's partog, round-faced, well-built, remained in the room. We talked for a long time. When should we hold the party meeting? Petrov asked thoughtfully, biting the tip of a pencil. Tomorrow night, answered Berest, we cannot delay it. And the Komsomol? Battalion, company, in a day or two, so that communists are present at each of these meetings. Let's write it down like that. We must talk to young soldiers about the military oath, especially about discipline and vigilance, emphasized Berest. Early morning. Breathing is easy. The company's headed for Lake Mantel. Sing. Captain Guselnikov commands. And the ringing tenor of Private Yakimovich spills over the field. The formation friendship picks up. The song inspires people. With it imperceptibly for themselves, soldiers pass more than 3 kilometers. At the lake, the companies are divided into platoons, squads, and begin training. In the clearing near the old oak tree lined up department, Senior Sergeant Sayonova, he is one of the company, which I commanded in the garrison Babka, the rest are not. His uniform tightly fits his slim figure, on his lean face frozen expression of strict concentration. Squinting from the bright sun, he scrutinizes the soldiers. We will practice the techniques and rules of firing automatic rifles, he says, and immediately deftly shows how to prepare to fire a rifle from a lying position and from the knee. Some of the youth, says the commander, may think, why say all this, who needs such an exercise? Who thinks so, he is wrong and will pay for poor training with blood. If you do not kill the enemy, he will kill you. In battle, the stronger, more experienced, skillful and dexterous wins. Remember Pavlov of Stalingrad. The house he defended became a real fortress. The Nazis broke their teeth on it. Why? Pavlov knew his business. The soldiers of the department are divided into pairs and train. Classes are in full swing. The young are helped by the experienced, those who in the harsh battles have already tested their marksmanship in shooting at the enemy. In the battalion began intense combat training. From dawn to dawn people were learning the military business. Daily days, to the limit saturated with training, went by quickly. Everyone tried to do their best, both soldiers and commanders. And it is understandable we knew that the day would come when everyone would face the most severe test, a bloody battle with the enemy, driven into his den. Soon the commander of the regiment set us a task to prepare for a tactical exercise with overcoming a water obstacle with live firing. To reinforce the battalion was assigned an artillery and mortar battery. The latter was commanded by Lieutenant Minakov, my fellow Uralian, a brave and determined officer. He was proud of his military specialty and considered the 120mm mortar a powerful weapon. At the firing, Minakov always watched with admiration how Pood mines burst with great force, throwing lumps of earth far away. A division of 122mm howitzers was assigned for support. It was necessary to force Lake Mantle about a kilometre wide. The fulfillment of this task was preceded by thorough preparation. For several days we were busy moving to the starting line. On command, the soldiers inflated rubber boats, carried them on their shoulders to the water, and then proceeded to cross the lake. In the beginning, the training was not organized enough. Mistakes were made. They forgot wooden planks on the shore and put the bipods of hand machine guns on the rubber sides of the boats, or poorly prepared stands for machine guns. In order to achieve coherence and simultaneous launching of boats, we conducted dozens of trainings. It required such a strain that soldiers' uniforms became wet with sweat. On the eve of the exercise, I went ashore to better study the terrain and think about the possibility of using all the firepower. The sun was slipping toward sunset. With binoculars in my hands, I looked over the wide surface of the lake and the surrounding terrain. On the shores, as far as the eye can see, stretches coniferous and deciduous forest. On our eastern side, the descent to the water is gentle, on the opposite side steep rocky slopes, and further on a boundless green forest strip. Quietly humming a song, Captain Guselnikov came out of the bushes. "Where are you going, Ivan?" "I'm looking for a place to lay brushwood so that people wouldn't get stuck in the swamp when launching the boats." We stopped, smoked, admiring the purple sunset. A conversation started. Each of us wanted to share our dreams about the future, to talk about what might be ahead. "Can you imagine how many water frontiers we will overcome on our way?" "A lot," quietly said Guselnikov, machine drawing circles in the sand with a twig. Not for nothing the Germans call the Oder the river of German destiny. They will not give it up without a fight. In my opinion, Ivan, the exercises at Lake Mantel are a rehearsal before forcing the Oder, as well as the canals and rivers flowing west of it. "And look out, combat. You need to keep your eyes open, critically assessing the terrain," said Guselnikov. "And I think we have made a mistake. Even from here, from a low place, and that can see the boats, the enemy will easily detect them from their height." I mentally praised him for his good point, but I was ashamed of myself for the fair reproach. I lit the already extinguished cigarette, looked intently into his eyes and said, "Good, we must fix it." The battalion, raised on alarm, moved to the starting line. At the observation post, equipped in the coastal shrubbery, gathered regimental commanders, battalion commanders and artillery chiefs. Here was also the division commander, General V.M. Shatilov. Soon behind the bushes heard the noise of a gazika, and on the path leading to the observation post showed the stately figure of General Perevertkin. He greeted each officer warmly. His good mood was transmitted to everyone around him. He immediately somehow became more cheerful. "Nistreyev, everything is ready?" asked me the regimental commander. "Yes, comrade colonel." And then high in the sky red rockets scattered in a fiery sheaf. Hundreds of invisible eyes were watching from their hiding places, waiting for this signal. It set the whole battalion in motion. Artillery from closed positions and direct fire simultaneously opened fire. The enemy shore was covered with smoke of continuous bursts of mines and shells. The bushes seemed to come to life, stirred. The soldiers dropped camouflage nets, took inflatable boats on their shoulders and quickly ran to the lake. In a wide front, the units came to the swampy shore to begin the crossing. In front, grasping the bow of the boat with strong hands, firmly stepped Squad Commander Staff Sergeant Gusev, namesake of the Chief of Staff. From exertion he slightly hunched over, and on his swarthy face appeared bright blush. Next to Gusev, bent under the weight of the load, is a soldier, Zozulia. Without stopping, they enter the water, dragging the boat behind them and rushing to jump into it. Water is getting into their boots, their clothes are getting wet, restricting their movements, but no one pays attention to it. This is how all departments act. On command, the soldiers take the oars and row hard, and machine gunners, more comfortably placed in the bow of the boat, are made to fire. The launching takes place at the same time. About 50 boats cast off from the shore. Several dozen hand and machine guns open fire on the opposite shore. The dry crackle of short bursts merges into a continuous rumble, shaking the air. Howitzers rumble. The shaky marshy ground trembles underfoot. With hissing and whistling shells fly overhead. From my station I am watching the actions of the units. A little worried. As in a real battle. Anxious, waiting for the decisive moment, the attack. Thoughts feverishly changing one another. Obviously, by habit, attention is directed to the fact that in case of failure, to make some new decision. But everything goes as planned. Under cover of artillery and mortar fire and machine guns, the boats are moving farther and farther away from the shore. Following them are crossed communicators, sappers, battalion headquarters. Then, loaded on pontoons, artillery battery. Forcing the water frontier is held at a rapid pace. As soon as the boats approach the western bank, the soldiers jump into the water, with weapons at the ready to climb the steep slope. With a shout of hurrah, in a wide stream of companies attack the stronghold of the enemy, on the height and seize its western slopes. The immediate task is accomplished. Next, the battalion advances to the height of Lisieux, which is 4 kilometers from the lake. Exercises continue in the conditions of hilly and forested terrain. Through dense thickets and hollows, the units advance in a chain. They maintain elbow-to-elbow communication between them, so as not to lose the given direction and not to deviate from it. In the open areas of the company, make rapid rushes of 300 to 500 meters. Especially hard here have to machine gunners and mortars, but they are trying to keep up. An hour and a half later, the battalion reached the western slopes of the height of Lisieux, and at this time in the air scattered green rockets, the signal of counterattack infantry and tanks of the enemy. Soldiers hastily set up firing positions. Artillerymen rolled out guns on direct fire. We repel the counterattack. That's the end of the exercise. Companies go to the western slopes of the height of Lisieux, where commanders check the presence of people, the state of weapons. Soldiers stand tired and soaked, but satisfied that the difficulties of tactical exercises left behind. Senior leaders and mediators arrive here as well. Taking out notebooks, they report something to the corps commander. General S.N. Perevertkin listens to them and goes to the soldiers, frozen in formation at attention. Before the formation, the commander makes a brief review of the exercise. The task set, he says, successfully accomplished. You acted skillfully, showed discipline and resourcefulness. Management of units was organized correctly. As a drawback, I note that during the offensive in the depth of the enemy, defense mortar company broke away, and communication with the battalion headquarters established late. The area of firing positions for mortars were chosen on the plain instead of using the back slopes of the hills. He further said, the sanitary platoon followed the fighting order, as in a parade. That's not the way to do it. These mistakes must be taken into account. The general was a little silent, shrewdly looking over the wet, tired soldiers, and with a rise continued. For excellent actions at the exercises, to all the personnel of the battalion I declare gratitude. We serve the Soviet Union. The battalion responded in friendship. The second week of stay at Lake Mantel was coming to an end. From sunrise until late at night, the soldiers improved their combat training. Their friendship grew stronger. Each company, Each platoon was now a close-knit fighting family. Soon after the exercise, I was called by the regiment commander. Rifle battalion commanders gathered in a mansion on the shore of the lake. Colonel Zinchenko welcomed us. General Perevertkin summons everyone, he reported. In about 10 minutes, on horseback, we were on our way to the Corps headquarters, which was located on the eastern shore of the Oder. The officers realized that not today, tomorrow, we would be sent to the front line. But where to? There were different opinions on this matter. Some assumed that we would be sent to the northwest, others to Czechoslovakia, others to Berlin. And yet everyone secretly hoped that we would attack the capital of Germany. We had such assumptions even under Cummins. This was the main question that worried everyone. The meeting was held in a dilapidated building. Here were present generals, officers of the 79th Rifle Corps, including battalion commanders. We were warned that everything that would be discussed was a special secret. General Perevertkin spoke before us. He announced the order of the Supreme Commander-in-Chief about the offensive on Berlin. Going to the map, the Corps Commander-in-General outlined the system of defense of German troops in the Berlin direction. Then he demanded that the commanders once again check the readiness of units to act in accordance with the plan of the upcoming offensive. Leaving the Corps headquarters, each of us experienced both joy and anxiety. Our troops stood on the threshold of a new battle. The Soviet army was preparing for a decisive offensive. The troops of the Byelorussian fronts had already concentrated on the banks of the Oder, and the main forces of the First Ukrainian Front on the Neisse. Tens of thousands of guns were pulled up. Heavy and medium tanks with a full set of ammunition, filled with fuel, were at the starting lines. Thousands of airplanes, camouflaged, ready from the air to support the offensive of ground units, stood at the front airfields. The operation was being prepared in strict secrecy. After the meeting, the battalion for another 24 hours engaged in combat training. On April 12, 1945, we left Lake Mantel. In the evening, General Shatilov conducted a review of the division's units and subdivisions. Then he gathered regimental commanders and set the task to go to the Oder area. There our units arrived on time and stood for a day in 5 kilometers from the river. April 13th, General Shatilov, together with the commanders of regiments and battalions of the 150th Infantry Division, conducted reconnaissance. Officers got acquainted with the enemy's defense system and the location of its firepower, studied the terrain, the designated areas of the offensive, clarified the delimitation lines, established the order of interaction. It was necessary to think over, to provide everything down to the smallest detail. Under the cover of darkness, regiments and battalions crossed to the west bank of the river and prepared for the offensive. This is when the crucial moment came. We were to attack in the main direction.